video is sponsored by Babbel. It is week 2 of Speckles month. If you missed it last week, I showed you how to make your very own colorful grog. But this week I'm going to try something that I've never tried before, and that is to make speckles with glaze. And I'm not just talking about like flicking a paintbrush to splatter glaze. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, you know how some pre-made glazes have little speckles floating in them? I'm talking about how to make that. Now, I have to give a shout out to Joe from Old Forge. I'm basically following his blog tutorial exactly. So all credit for coming up with this concept has to go to him. Let's get into this. About a week ago, I poured some of my cobalt glaze into this lid. Basically, the idea is that you want it to dry out. It's a little wet still. I think it's like 90% dry. I'm hoping it's gonna work. It's definitely cracking. The first thing we need to do is crush up the glaze to make those granules. So in case you did see last week's video, I'm going to be using pretty much the same technique to crush the glaze. So I want to get a plastic bag and I want to make sure I'm working in a ventilated area. So that means opening the window. If you have an air purifier, I would suggest that you turn it on now. One thing that's absolutely essential though is that you wear your respirator. Do not want to be breathing in glaze dust, especially not cobalt. Okay, the next thing that you need to do is sieve the glaze. You gotta get yourself some kind of sieve. What I like about this is it comes with a bunch of different mesh sizes. Anything will do, but obviously the sieve size you have is going to impact the size of the glaze. I'm going to go for a sort of a chunky speckle here. These don't come with like mesh sizes or anything, but this mesh is like 2 mil. Just experiment. You're just gonna have to experiment and see what sizes you like. I don't even know if this is the right size to use. If you want your speckle size to be consistent, you're gonna need 2 different meshes because I'm going to use what falls through this mesh plus what gets stopped by this finer mesh so that everything is going to be between these 2 sizes. And then anything that doesn't go through, I can throw back in the bag and roll out again. I'm gonna keep rolling it. So, we sieved out the pieces that were too big, and now we're going to sieve out the pieces that are too small so that we have a consistent size of glaze speckle. So to do that, I'm going to take a smaller mesh size that is smaller than the size of speckle that I want. And anything that passes through that is going to get recycled. So now all of the glaze that went through, this is too powdery. Like I don't want this in. It's not going to make a good speckle because it's just going to be this powder. So it's, I mean, it might be interesting to experiment with, but I do believe that it's just going to stain the base glaze and not create that speckle that we're looking for. So I'm just going to throw it back into the glaze bucket along with the pieces that were too big as well. So Joe recommends 750 to 800 Celsius for sintering the glaze speckles. I'm really tempted to put this in my bisque kiln because I fire at 900 degrees and I don't believe that my glaze will melt, but I am a bit nervous to make that risk. I think I'm going to try the 900 because for you guys, it is incredibly inefficient to fire this by itself. I would like to give you a recipe that you can actually just put into your bisque. Let's try it in the bisque. If it doesn't, we can always retry it later with a lower temperature. While we wait for that to fire, let's take a little break to talk about today's sponsor, Babbel. Obwohl ich in den USA geboren und aufgewachsen bin, Weißt du, dass ich eigentlich in Deutschland lebe? I have been living in Germany for the last 9 years, and let me tell you, learning the language has been a struggle. I've tried pretty much everything, online classes, in-person classes, tandem partners, even like hardcore immersion. But as a small business owner now, I don't have time for that anymore. Then I found Babbel. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. I'm obsessed with it because the lessons are designed by real language teachers, not a bot. In as little as 10 minutes a day, you can start learning a new language in just 3 weeks. Babbel teaches you real-world conversations, so when I speak to my neighbors, I can feel confident finding the right words and feel connected to my community. They even have live classes. It's like having your very own language school in your pocket. So if you want to try it out for yourself, they are currently having a Black Friday sale. So right now, you can get 60% off your subscription using my link down below. Now let's get back to the video. The Glaze Speckles are a little bit stuck together, but I'm hoping they're not too stuck. Okay, it's coming off if I kind of scrape at it. Maybe we should fire this. So something sort of crazy happened literally yesterday. I'm scrolling through Instagram and Old Forge, who this whole technique is based on his tutorial, posted a reel about how to make this. But he did something in that reel that was actually not included in the blog tutorial, which is to check that it's sintered. So I'm pretty sure this is sintered already. If anything, it's like a little over sintered. But in case you're not sure if you've fired this enough, you can test to make sure that the glaze isn't just gonna fall apart as soon as you mix it with the glaze. What he did is he took a little cup and put a few glazes in and then added some water. And then the idea is if they fall apart, then they're not fired enough. If they're kind of sticking strong, then they're fine to use. So I've got some bowls here I thought I would use, and I'm going to use a white base glaze. And I think I want to try 2 different techniques for applying it. One, mixing it in with the glaze, and the second one, dipping it in the glaze, and then while the glaze is still wet, I'll sprinkle some on top. My fear is that if I mix it in with the glaze, the speckles are just going to sink to the bottom. I've had this experience in the past with speckled glazes, so that's why I'm suspecting it might happen. So let's try both ways and then we can compare. I brought my glazes in here because it's cold in the other room. Okay, I grabbed a extra bucket and I'm going to not pour the glaze speckles directly into my white base glaze because I don't want to mess up the whole batch. I'm going to have to sacrifice a good amount of this in order to dunk that whole bowl. So hopefully I like it and then I can just keep using it. Before I dump it in, I'm going to, for science, see how much speckles this is. And I should probably also measure how much glaze. 46 grams of glaze speckles in a 8-kilo bucket of glaze. That's glaze with the water mixed in. So before I pour it in, I just want to tell you the plan because I'm going to need to move fast. So I'm going to pour it in, I'm going to mix it with the drill, and then immediately I need to dunk my bowl. This is the plan. This is also going to need to happen rather quick. I'm going to dunk my bowl into the white glaze, and then before the glaze has a chance to dry, I'm going to take a pinch of my sprinkles and sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle all over the pot. I want to do this before the glaze has a chance to dry because I'm thinking if I sprinkle on this when the glaze is dry, it's just gonna fall off. So, I'm gonna need to work really quickly. And it's dry. Can I like... Ah, that works. That sort of works. Sort of. Using a bit of water helped a bit, but I wanted it to be random, and it's definitely not random. Like, it's sticking in the places that I sprinkled it on. I made a huge mess, by the way. I'm gonna have to clean this up. I mean, I guess it worked. Conclusion, I think paint on glaze might be the way to go. Do I have another piece of bisque? Let's try that. So I did find a random piece of bisque, and even more important, I have some paint on glaze from my friends at Bots. I don't usually carry or use paint on glaze, but we're working on something, so Bots gave me some glazes. So this is not a white glaze, this is like a beautiful turquoisey, so let's mix it in. I only have a little bit, ooh, now I have even less. I only have a little bit left. I'm just gonna paint it on. And I'm hoping that the glaze kind of keeps it suspended, because this is way thicker than a dipping glaze. Okay, I'm just gonna pour the rest of the speckles into... Oh yeah, they are definitely staying suspended. That's awesome. I'm a little impatient for paint on glaze because you usually need a few layers. So, okay, I'm loving how this looks. This is definitely the thickest application of speckles. So let's put all of our pots into the kiln. I think I'm gonna put this guy in too, just to see what happens. Wow, we have some really interesting results, a few surprises. So let's start with the first technique, mixing the glaze speckles into the base glaze and dipping. So if you remember, it seemed like we didn't get very much glaze speckles on it, and it was right. The glaze speckles sunk immediately to the bottom. So for my glaze, maybe it's a little bit more of a watery glaze, I'm not sure, but the glaze speckles didn't stay suspended enough in the glaze to coat the whole thing. So they just stayed where you can see I was pouring the glaze out. That's when they stuck to the inside of the pot. The bowl where I sprinkled the glaze speckles on top, this was a little bit more successful. If you remember, I kept the glaze wet with a spray bottle and then just sprinkled the glaze on top. There's definitely more glaze speckle coverage here. I'm not personally too excited about how clustered they ended up being. I wonder if you could do something like sift the glaze speckles over it somehow. Maybe that would make them a little bit more spread out. But I think the real winner here is the paint on glaze. This ended up being a crazy effect. So remember, this wasn't a white base glaze. The base glaze was this light blue. So it didn't have that much chemistry going on, but it did have a little bit of chemistry in which the glaze speckles did not stay where they were. The light blue glaze sort of absorbed them, and then they sunk down in the kiln due to gravity. This is obviously not the effect that I was going for, but it is so beautiful. And this is just like the magic of pottery. And then of course, special mention goes to the glaze bisque bowl. I actually really like the color combination of the transparent glaze over the slightly off-white clay with the blue better than I like the bright white against it. I think it's a little too primary here. So I hope that you found this video helpful. This is actually week 2 of Speckles month. If you want to see last week's video about how you make your own colorful grog, I will have that linked right here. And if you're coming from the future and you want to see next week's video where I will talk about iron speckles, that's going to be linked right here. If you're watching in the present, you're just going to have to wait till next week. See you guys then. Bye, friends.